Okay, just give me 2 seconds. And
can you hear me, Daniel?
Hi, George. How are you?
Where is it coming from?
Where's that sound coming from now?
What sound are you hearing?
Daniel?
Hello? Can you hear me okay?
Dan?
What about now?
Daniel, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Excellent. Shall I start?
Just give me 2 seconds. I'll introduce and then we can get going. I'm just going to make it live on YouTube as well, so people will be able to share the link to that. Bear with me just 1 second.
I'll do it this way. I'll do it this way.
Get in focus. It's a bit blurred to me.
It's not.
No?
It's a fantastic time for YouTube to freeze. Let's just make sure we're streaming before we start. I'm on YouTube.
So these are all the panelists, honey, just so you can see. Look, these are all people who have joined us.
Yeah.
See, lots of people.
Okay, fantastic. So now we should be live on YouTube. So welcome everyone to this online meeting. Obviously, due to the coronavirus crisis, restrictions on traveling, etc., we've had to change how we're meeting and working in these times. Hopefully, in the near future, you know, things will be back to normal. We'll be back to having meetings around the country with lots of other people coming together in person, which I think is a much more fun and hospitable way to do things rather than the cold embrace of the webcam, but needs must for now. So we're going to try and hold these meetings regularly to keep people in touch, to educate people and to introduce the Workers' Party and what we're about to more and more people. So what I'm just going to run through is a little bit about how the meeting's going to work. So everyone in the Zoom will be able to ask questions, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So if you do have any questions, we'll have people looking out for those. So just pop them in the chat and we'll try and come around to everyone. There's also a feature to raise your hand. If you click on the mobile interface, if you just tap on the screen, you can find a button called More, and you can raise your hand that way. And on the computer, you can click on Participants and select to raise your hand. So that might help us spot you as well if you want to contribute at the end or have a question. So George is going to give us a talk on what is socialism. So obviously a pressing question, especially now as you know, the failings of the NHS due to underfunding and privatisation over the past decades have come up under this coronavirus crisis, making it all the more obvious. The economic crisis, where millions of people are signing on to universal credit now, and the election of Sir Kier Starmer to the Labour leadership has got a lot of people asking questions about Labour. So without further ado, I will put George on if I can. 1 second, George, let me just unmute you. It's not come up with the button here, sorry. Bloody thing. One second, George.
Correctly,
No.
but
Sorry,
we'll
George.
hopefully, are you telling me to stop?
Sorry, yeah, can you just restart that? Apologies.
Okay, no problem. As you can see, this is new technology, but we intend to be groundbreaking in the Workers' Party. The point that Dan makes is a good one, that this is a substitute for real face-to-face public meetings, but it's not a bad substitute, and it has this benefit that I can go around the country as I did in Birmingham and in Liverpool, and we had plans for a different city every month, but that means that we can only be joined realistically by people who live in the region and maybe even in the city that the public meeting is in. This way, we'll be able to have regular meetings for all members without anyone having to leave their door. And that will be useful because we can't have like a camp following around the country. This way, we can be in regular touch, and we intend to be so. We intend to make best use, maximum use of social media, of the arts, of video and audio, and so on. We intend to be a different kind of political party, and this first Zoom public meeting, which is also being broadcast to non-party members on other platforms, will be the first of many. So thank you to Dan and to all the comrades who were involved in setting this up. And thank you very much indeed for joining me. I'll speak for about half an hour. Dan will no doubt tug me on the coattails if I seem to be going on too long, because we want maximum time for questions and contributions from the members. I will not be interrupting the broadcast to go out to the front door and clap for Boris. Not because we wish him ill, personally speaking. It's against my religion to wish suffering and illness on anyone, and I don't. I'm very much hoping that Boris Johnson makes a full recovery, not least because his pregnant partner is also suffering from the virus and has been quite ill. And Boris Johnson is a man in the end of the day. He is a human being, and it's immoral, in my view, to wish suffering on any human being. In saying that, that's showing rather more empathy than Boris Johnson has shown to others in the human race over a long time, and he's not alone in that. One of our supporters dug up on Twitter today the unfortunate juxtaposition of a tweet made by Julia Hartless-Brute of Talk Radio, my former parish, in which she denounced everyone for not wishing to go over the top with their best wishes to Boris, and making it plain that it was sinful, as indeed it is, to be happy that someone has died or is suffering. One of our people dug up a tweet from a few years back in which the same Julia Hartless-Brute said how happy she was that Fidel Castro had died. And this kind of hypocrisy is unbecoming and is just that, hypocrisy with a capital H. Rather, at 8 o'clock, or indeed every hour. My focus is on, my heart is with all of the people suffering from this dreadful illness, this horrific pandemic, which is acting as a grim reaper around the world and will take with it probably hundreds of thousands of people and will scar the lives, mar the lives of many, many more, even if they survive. And that's without calculating the damage to families left behind by the premature death of their relatives. Just yesterday, a woman died in the delivery room in a North London hospital. They saved the baby, but the mother died. So although the baby will live, it will live always with the knowledge that their mother perished giving birth to them because of this horrific coronavirus. I've got to say at this point, before I move on to my main subject, how irritating, indeed, worse than irritating, it is becoming to see people swarming around still with their tin pot conspiracy theories that this is all exaggerated, that it's a plot, that it's a controlled demolition, and all the buzzwords of the people on the outer limits of political activity here in this country of Britain, but also much more widely in the world. Even as they hear the stories like the one I've just told about the mother dying in the delivery room, even as they learn that their relatives and their neighbors, their workmates are dying. 10 bus workers now have died because they're being forced to work in unsafe conditions by Arriva and other private companies that are not affording them even the basic minimum of personal protection equipment. Even as they see all of this, they keep up their ceaseless, endless, cynical, verging on maniacal denial, flat earthism. And it's one of the, because a lot of these people are people that I have been working with on other things, like the Julian Assange case, for example. It shows me sharply that while we are with some people, sometimes, we are not of them. We are not them. Socialists are not libertarians, that candy-colored, candy-striped concept. We are not individualists. We don't hate the state. On the contrary, we believe in a state, a strong state, and as I shall come to adumbrate, a state that takes a controlling interest in the economy in the country, a state which represents the people and acts for the people in the wider society and in the economy. So I suppose I'm answering some questions first. I'm not telling you what socialism is. I'm starting by telling you what it isn't. And it isn't this ultra individualistic, so-called libertarian, so-called liberal trends in political life. I think there has never been a better time to launch a party like the Workers' Party of Britain. Now, you might expect me to say that as some kind of spin, but actually, if you think of it objectively, the conditions are now perfectly in place for the Workers' Party to dramatically grow. And that is already happening. Since Saturday and the election of Sir Kier Starmer, the Workers' Party's following and support has grown exponentially. We are already, and it's only Tuesday, We are already well over 10,000 followers on our Twitter page. Our Facebook is growing. Membership inquiries are coming in so fast that our printer is unable to keep up with the demand for our party program and notes and so on. And so why is it that we are now perfectly placed? Well, there are two reasons. First of all, capitalism has never looked so naked, so incapable, incompetent, so heartless, brutish, exploitative, and in the end redundant than it looks from almost any vantage point this day. Somebody said, Echo Marley, one of our members, I think, on Twitter just half an hour ago, that coronavirus has exposed the emperor as naked, without clothes, incapable of fulfilling even the most basic demands of the billions of people on this earth. A system utterly incapable, unable of rising to the existential challenge of a pandemic such as this. Now, we have known this, some of us, for a long time, all of us at one time. We knew it when Hitler was at the Channel ports and when we stood alone in 1940 and 41 here in this island. We were forced, because capitalism couldn't be relied upon to defend the country, to launch a war which became total war alongside our allies. Capitalism couldn't do it. Capitalism couldn't decide who got the potatoes in the store, who got the sugar, the flour, the coal, because if it was left to capitalism, the rich would have come in and bought up all the potatoes and maybe set up outside, sell them to us at a bigger profit. Do you see? Capitalism cannot make these kind of calls. Only the state can do it. Because Britain was existentially challenged in the Second World War, the state had to step in and become the controlling element in the national economy. And it acquired unto itself enormous powers, including to send people off to war in the various fronts. And our parents and grandparents lived through that period. I myself was born in the year that rationing ended. Winston Churchill was still the Prime Minister when I was born. Don't tell the wife, she thinks I'm 45. Do you see my point? That when extraordinary challenges face us, we must rely not on market forces, not on capitalist companies, not on bearded entrepreneurs in Caribbean islands. Yes, you, Mr. Branson, we can't rely on Mr. Dyson. We can't rely on Philip Green, Sir Philip, thanks to Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. We can't rely on these people. We must rely on an interventionist state, which is the only organ in war that we can rely on to act in the national interest as opposed to the personal interest of the individual capitalist, individual company, even if those companies were well-intentioned and led by saintly chief executives, which we now know, if we didn't know before, almost none of them are. I've just been on RT America, and the item before me was about Jeff Bezos, who's doing a roaring trade in Amazon, delivering sex toys and new coats for the wife, bicycles for the boy's birthday, everything that is not necessary at all in this crisis is being sold faster than it can be put up on the shelves. And Bezos is requiring his underpaid, underprotected workforce to go into a warehouse which isn't clean and where many of them are going down with the coronavirus in order to have these things delivered. And when the workers and the unions in the United States, in Detroit and in New York, walked out and had a meeting in their lunch break, their shop stewards, their union spokespeople were brutally dismissed from the company. That's Jeff Bezos, that's Amazon. Yesterday, Richard Branson moved, can you believe this? A huge proportion of the remaining assets that he had in Britain to the Virgin Isle that he lives on and owns. Why? Because he's about to get a massive bailout from the British taxpayer for his airline. And he fears that some people, when this is all over, will demand shares in his assets that he has now taken offshore. The same is true with Arriva. I mentioned it earlier. Workers on Arriva buses in London, it may be true elsewhere, are being threatened with the sack if they take any unauthorized safety equipment or safety precautions on the bus that they're driving, like taping off the front seat nearest to the driver. They've got letters from the company threatening to sack them. So our corporations are not in any case run by saints. They're usually run by buccaneers, by pirates who got rich in the first place by being pirates and who have their hand out now looking for public money to see them through this crisis. But it's not only that. It's obvious now that the rise of globalized monopoly capitalism has gone hand in hand with the steady attrition of the public realm. In order to serve the interests of monopoly capitalism, the public realm was squeezed and strangled and left to rot, to wither on the vine. Not just, but of course most acutely now, the National Health Service, which is buckling under the strain of this epidemic, this pandemic, because of 40 years of privatization and austerity, which was implemented to suit the interests of monopoly capital and the kind of buccaneers that I've just been talking about. And thus, we in Britain find that we are, despite the heroism of the doctors and nurses, many of them sick, some of them now dying, to save people in this pandemic, they simply don't have the tools for the job because nobody bought them in. Nobody bought enough PPE. Why? Because it was not profitable to do so. And this is the difference between private and public. The public, a publicly owned economy, a socialist economy, would produce and buy what we need or might need, realistically could need. A private capitalist economy produces that which is profitable and just in time. They don't want warehouses. They don't want big stores. Not least because they want to keep you changing your tastes, needing a new update, a different line. So their production is just-in-time production, and their supply lines are not as they were in the past. Local companies, motor car companies, for example, in the West Midlands, would have hundreds, thousands of smaller companies around them, a constellation of them, supplying the parts that the car company would need no longer. Production now has supply lines so long as they can find the cheapest possible place to produce them. And so that things which you may require in a hurry cannot be acquired in a hurry because the length of those supply lines. All that is solid melted into air, as Marx predicted that it would in 1848 in the manifesto. And all that is sacred is profane. Look at what we're seeing now. People are dying alone. Their parents can't see their children dying, can't go to their funeral. A little boy in London died alone and was buried alone. Everything that our community, our society once held sacred is threatened by globalized monopoly capitalism, which, as I pointed out on Sunday on the Moats, acts actually rather like the virus. Forgive me if you think this is going too far, but what is the virus? The virus is something without a heart, without morals, without any purpose, except more, and it parasites on healthy, living organisms like us. It attaches itself to our healthy organs and destroys them in order to generate more of itself, only to be spat out and make still more of itself whilst destroying someone else. The virus owes no national loyalty or loyalty to community of any kind, just like capitalism. Capitalism doesn't care if you're black or white, Sunni or Shia, Catholic or Protestant, gay or straight. To it, you are a customer or you are a source of profit by being one of their producers, from which they seek to extract as much value as they can for the least that they can. That's the parasitical nature of capitalism. And that's the parasitical nature of the virus. So unless you persuade me otherwise, I don't resile from that comparison. So we stand for the opposite of these things. We stand for the antithesis of individualistic, profit-driven, often useless, unnecessary production. We stand for community. We believe that there is such thing as society. Boris Johnson's just discovered that. But when he used to praise Margaret Thatcher, it was in the days when she said, there is no such thing as society. She said it. I saw her lips move. She said it in Scotland, at the Church of Scotland General Assembly. How's that for sacrilege? She said that the meaning of the parable of the Good Samaritan was not that he stopped and refused to pass by the injured man on the other side of the road, but that he was rich, that he'd made himself rich and therefore could help the injured man at the side of the road. History doesn't record how these stolid churchmen received this blasphemy, but Mrs. Thatcher was, of course, Boris Johnson's role model at the time. So we believe there is a thing called society, and we believe that it must be organized. We believe, self-evident really, that we will achieve more working together than we would individually, and that individual rights of individual people cannot be such that they prejudice the interests of their neighbor. I have a right to build a bonfire in my back garden, but not if it's going to blacken my neighbor's washing on the line or force my neighbor choking to withdraw. I have the right to swing my fist, but it stops at the end of the nose of the person sitting or standing next to me. So that's one of our characteristics. We believe that we not only will go farther forward together, but that we must go forward together, that we leave nobody behind, that we will tolerate no exploiter on our back, we will carry no parasites, we will organize our society in a way that every person who can work will work productively at something. Those that are not able to work, either because they're unwell or they're disabled or they're too old to work or too young to work, must be looked after fairly by the rest of us. Not least because the rest of us will one day be too old to work, one day have children that are too young to work, and God forbid, one day be too sick or disabled ourselves to work. In a way, the National Health Service is in microcosm a socialist society where everyone gives according to their ability through a progressive taxation system, or at least that was the ideal, and everyone will take from the National Health Service free at the point of delivery when and if they need it. And many of us who've got children, many of us who've had children sick, many of us who've been sick ourselves know the value of that. It's not that we believe that everything should be nationalized. Anybody who's ever eaten a meal in a state restaurant knows that you probably get a better dinner in your little corner tandoori than you would in the British state catering corporations, aircraft hangar. Anybody who's ever worn a state-made suit knows that you probably could do better with a local tailor. We don't believe in the public ownership of the fruiterer on the corner or the ice cream shop on the high street. But we do believe that not only is public ownership the most efficient and fair way, both for the workers and the consumers of the goods and services of the commanding heights of the economy, both because that's the most efficient way of production, making the economies of scale that are required to provide equally to everyone access to the goods that we need, but because some industries are frankly too strategically important to be left to the private sector. The railways is again a case in point. The whole country, the whole population depends on the railways, yet the railways have been balkanized into 100 pieces, each governed by and run by different private companies, but only on the basis that the state provides subsidy to those private companies at 3 times the level that we used to subsidize British Rail when we owned it in total. Imagine, we're paying through the nose for 100 private companies, some of which are state companies in their own countries, imagine, in order to run a railway which is ever more expensive, ever less satisfactory, ever more overcrowded, ever more hated by the traveling public who have to use it. Imagine, we're paying through the nose to be made angry by our so-called independent private train companies, railways, telecommunications, the electricity, the gas, the water. How come? Look, somebody comes to your door and says, do you want to change gas supplier? It's the same gas coming down the same gas pipes, which you've already paid for almost certainly when we owned the gas. This is a nonsense, the privatization of these utilities. And they should all be taken into public ownership, back into public ownership, without compensation. The people that took them from us have already been amply compensated with decades of profit-taking, dividends, and high salaries for the executives and the people misrunning them. There are many industries that should be in public ownership. And some industries, or rather businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, which will no doubt, even if we had a socialist country, continue to be in the private sector. But, and here's the rub, the state must have the controlling say in the direction of the economy, whether public or private. The state must have the decisive voice and vote on how we organize our national economy. That's a big difference between a socialist and a liberal capitalist. Now, I said earlier that this was the perfect time for two reasons, and I've given you one, that capitalism stands utterly exposed as unable to meet the needs of the people, even in the richest capitalist countries, never mind in the poorest, most exploited countries. Do you know that 40% of all Americans, 40%, don't have $400 in cash, savings, or credit to meet an emergency? $400, 300 pounds, 40% of all Americans. The most powerful and richest country in the world. The acme of capitalism. 40% of its people don't have 300 quid, even including their credit worthiness. 60 million Americans have no access to healthcare, have no health insurance. 10 million Americans became unemployed in the last 7 days. America will, within the next 4 weeks, have more people unemployed than were unemployed in the Great Depression of the 1930s. And as we discovered then, when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches influenza. So we are about to face mass depression in the economies of the Western countries, of the capitalist countries of the world. So within a couple of weeks, by the time I speak to you next, we will have economic conditions obtaining in Western countries that last obtained in the deep depression of the 1930s. Now you tell me if that's a good time to be singing the praises of capitalism. Tell me if that's a good time to be ripping up the very minimal challenges to capitalism represented by the last Labour manifesto. Only someone who was insane would think this was the time to move the Labour Party to the right. And that brings me to the second reason why there's never been a better time for us, the Workers' Party, as an explicitly socialist party, a party for and by the working class, because the Labour Party has just disappeared in a puff of lavender in front of our eyes. It was only hanging on by its fingernails. Corbyn had already been taken hostage. I asked him once, blink twice if you want to be rescued. But they've now actually turned his face to the wall. They have swept his supporters from the shadow cabinet. They have elected a man so wooden, somebody tried to put a coat of paint on him this weekend. A man so dodgy that his correspondence with Sir Keith Vaz, MP, has been locked up in the Public Records Office till 2097. 2097 is when you'll be able to read the correspondence between the Director of Public Prosecutions, Kier Starmer, and Keith Vaz. So dodgy that he wrote to the Swedish authorities begging them not to give up their persecution of Julian Assange, begging them not to send their interrogators to London to interview him in the Ecuador embassy, to continue to insist on his extradition to Sweden and thereafter the United States of America. That's how dodgy Keir Starmer is. A man so dodgy, he hid the source of his campaign finance for the Labour leadership because it would have exposed that the sordid networks of Blairism provided virtually all of the funding behind Keir Starmer's leadership election campaign. A man so stupid that he personally was decisive in persuading more fool them, idiots them, Corbyn and MacDonald and the rest, to reverse Labour's policy on Brexit to a people's vote, second referendum, Brexit strategy, which cost the Labour Party the entire election. Now, 57% of those voting in the Labour leadership election picked Keir Starmer, which tells you perhaps more about them than it does even about him. But you can be sure, after the kicking out of Richard Bergen, the demotion of Long Bailey, the kicking out of Ian Lavery from his post as chairman of the Labour Party, and many others, that the Labour Party is now set on course for a return to the era of Tony Blair. When Sajid Javid fulsomely welcomed the fine public servant Sir Kier Starmer to his new post as leader of the opposition, you know that's because he knows that Starmer is no opposition. He will not challenge the fundamentals of capitalism. Lisa Nandy will not challenge the fundamentals of the Blairite neocon foreign policies of the last Labour governments. If I was living in one of the countries that these people have targeted, I'd be laying in some stores looking for a tin hat, because perhaps it might not be long before they're under bombardment in the old Blair way. So for these two reasons, we believe that advancing the case for socialism, for equality, for an end to the situation where a handful, literally less than 2 hands full of people, six people in the whole world own more wealth than half the population of the earth. That's 3.5 billion. Whilst billions of people live on either $1 or $1.5 a day, billions. Whilst hunger kills 8 million children every year, whilst unclean water kills millions of children and vulnerable people every year, whilst the inequality of our society and between our country and poor countries is so gross that millions of people are prepared to risk their lives on rubber dinghies or on dangerous tracks through war zones to escape their own place in order to try and reach ours. That kind of system was always difficult to defend. It always amazed me that it had so many people who called themselves intellectuals and academics who were ready to defend it. But I believe the time has come when fewer than ever people, ever before, will be prepared to defend it. And what we must be ready to do is immediately go on the offensive with our demands, which will take us in the direction of socialism and building a party that can lead the British workers in that direction. I commit whatever years, months, weeks, days are left to me to that task. It will be my principal task. It will be my task that I shall devote all my energy and any ability that I have to bring it about. And when I leave it, and leave it to you, I hope we'll be a powerful force indeed in the Workers' Party of Britain. Thanks for listening. Dan, I hope that does as an introduction.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, George. That was a brilliant talk, and I think it really introduces the concept of the Workers' Party, the reasons for the founding, and why we're doing this essentially. So
Yeah.
We've got a few really good questions. Some people are happy to go on camera to ask, and other people I'll just read them out. So let's make a few notes there. So we have a question from Charlie. What is the attitude of the Workers' Party to workers who are coming from other organisations towards us? I think that's in respect to, you know, do they have to leave their current organisations? Do they have to leave the Labour Party to join? Things like that. And what is our attitude to working with other parties that are on the left of politics?
Well, it's a very good question. And from our point of view, there are no bans or proscriptions. There are no barriers to people staying on in other parties, perhaps for a time, one foot in either party, waiting to see what happens. No bans on that. Most of our members have come from the Labour Party. Some are from the Brexit Party, some even from UKIP, and a good number of communists. And they have remained in some cases, certainly the communists have, remained in their original party, but are also members of the Workers' Party of Britain. And we're fine with that. Obviously, we are not a broad church in the sense that anyone can join us. That's why we have this candidate membership system. If you're a liberal, don't join us. If you're a Trotskyite, don't join us. If you're someone fixated by identity politics and so on, don't join us, because that's not what we are about. A very good article was published yesterday, an Irish magazine, following an interview they did with me. It's available online. Maybe the party will also share it with the members. It sums up our attitude on these things quite well, I think. As to working with other parties, not really, not formally. I mean, I can think of no party that I would want to work with. But of course, that doesn't mean we'll not be on the same protests or the same demonstrations or sometimes making the same demands. But formally, organically working with other parties of the left, you'd need to give me an example. But in theory, it's not really my thing. I've got to tell you that if we only attract the fragments of the far left, we'll be going nowhere. We need to organize people who've never been on the far left. We need to organize people who've never been in politics. We need to organize people that have only newly become politicized. If you look at Callum Bromley, for example, our leader in Sandwell, he came to one of our meetings in West Brom, describing himself as a capitalist. And now he's one of our key cadre. And he was in the Brexit party when he came to our meeting. We need to break new ground. I've met a lot of people in far left parties. And frankly, I wouldn't invite most of them home for tea. And I'm not sure that the Workers' Party should do so either.
Fantastic. Thank you, George. Yeah, for everyone asking questions in the chat, if you can just let me know if you're able to go on air with it, if you have a microphone and you're willing to ask yourself, just let me know. I haven't had a response from John whether he wants to go on air, so I'll just read it out from him just in case.
Okay.
We're at the beginning of a worrying spike in tensions with China and an increase in xenophobic racism. Combined with the depression, we're on the precipice of a scary combination. What can we do as a party to fight this?
Well, first of all, we aim to highlight, are now highlighting, the achievements of socialism in other countries, some of which no longer exist, but some of which very definitely do. Let me take one that is very close to my heart. Cuba. Cuba has been quarantined since 1960. It's now 2020. So for 60 years, it has been embargoed, destabilized, undermined, invaded, hundreds of assassination attempts against its leadership and so on. Yet what's the thing you most associate Cuba with today? Coming to other people's rescue with doctors, with nurses, with new drugs, with innovative healthcare, its biomedical industry, the best on the planet. The Chinese, for example, in a joint Chinese-Cuban enterprise have produced a development of the antiviral drug interferon, which may be the hope of the world, not just for this virus, but for any future virus pandemics. So far from this crisis being an opportunity to further punish, marginalize, hate Cuba, the opposite is the case. And it certainly is in the north of Italy, as it is in Spain, as it is or was previously in Pakistan and Kashmir after the earthquake there. Cuba leaves flowers everywhere it goes, and people tend those flowers, those gardens, and have a completely different attitude towards socialist Cuba than they would if they had not come face to face with her fragrance. China, too, has behaved in an exemplary fashion. The attempt by the far right Republicans in the United States, the Democrats are too busy hating Russia to be busy with China, but the Republicans in the United States, the crazed neocons, are trying to whip up anti-Chinese feeling in America as China is bombarding American cities and states with healthcare, in New York in particular, with hundreds of ventilators, millions of masks, scores of doctors and nurses arriving. So China has behaved, however this virus began, and I myself am not yet persuaded of the prevailing narrative on that, but however it began, China immediately mapped the genome, immediately gave it free gratis to every country in the world, warned every government in the world what they could expect, gave them advice and help on what they should do to meet that which was coming their way. And it's the great tragedy, as Boris Johnson himself is finding out this very evening, the great tragedy that all the time that we could have had to learn from China, to engage with China, to help us, by the time the virus arrived, it caught us still entirely unprepared. China has demonstrated the superiority of the socialist system. Not that China is entirely socialist. Of course, there's a lot of capitalism in China. There are more billionaires in China than anywhere else except the United States of America. But going back to something I said earlier, the state calls the shots. The Chinese state and government have the decisive say, and no billionaire in China would dare to tell the state, no, I'm not producing that. I'm producing this instead. So I don't believe that this crisis will end with a lurch to the right. I believe it will end with a turn to the left. But of course, we must be on our guard against attempts to witch hunt Chinese people or people who look like Chinese people, like my own wife, my own children. Of course we must. But I don't believe that will be the prevailing instinct of the British people or the people elsewhere as we come out of this crisis.
Thanks, George. Nicely optimistic into that question, which is much needed these days, I think. So Guillaume had a question, I think. So go ahead, Guillaume.
Hello, George. How are you, brother? I hope you're well.
Thank you.
And
wonderful to hear from you.
It's fantastic to be here. It's fantastic to be here. And first of all, I think that before I ask my question, I think it's a great opportunity for everyone watching now on YouTube and Facebook, or potential members, that this is kind of like a reckoning, and it's a great opportunity for everyone to join the Workers' Party and to share on their social media, because repetition is the mother of all games, and this is the time to do it for the next few weeks. So you've reached 1,000 members in a day on Saturday. Now we need to go for 10,000 in the next 4 weeks, and I think we've all got our part to play in this task. My question, brother, and you kind of mentioned it earlier on, talking about Cuba in particular. as you know, we've discussed that in the past. This is something that is really close to my heart. I'm an internationalist, I'm a political activist, and I've got some ties with Cuba, and I've been a member of Cuba Solidarity for over 15 years. I support as well countries like Palestine and Venezuela and Bolivia. But to come back to Cuba, you've mentioned it, they've been the light in the darkness, in the midst of this biggest global health crisis in over 100 years. Cuba doesn't produce chemical weapons or nuclear weapons like our friend Fidel used to say 3 or 4 years ago. They provide doctors and nurses, and we can see what they've done over the past 2 weeks, going to Italy, China, going to Andorra, going to some of the Caribbean islands, helping out and doing whatever they can. And again, a couple of days ago, we've seen that this illegal embargo caused by the US stopping ventilators going to Cuba when Cuba is helping the world. So the question I have for you, George, is as a party, I think it would be great, but are we going to build relationships with countries like Cuba? Are we going to build long-lasting relationships with Palestine, with Bolivia, and help them build relationship with trade unions? I think as a party, it would be great to do so and get our name out there. So I wish you, George, and your lovely lady and your children a remarkable and a wonderful evening. And I'm looking forward to see you soon. See you soon, brother.
God bless you. Thank you very much. For those who don't know, Guillaume is a famous French actor, and he may actually have been the very first member of the Workers' Party of Britain. He might be comrade number 1. And he has been tireless in promoting the party ever since our foundation towards the end of December. He's got some fantastic movies coming out. He's too shy to say, but Lawrence After Arabia is a brilliant piece of work, as is Homeless Ashes. So I'm glad that you're here, Guy, and I'm glad that you were the first person from the audience to actually speak. And the points that you made were all very powerful. If you compare Cuba's role in this crisis with the role of the United States, which first of all sought to buy up and secure a monopoly of a drug that was being developed by a German company and would have done so if the German government had not forbidden it. The United States has literally seized, like a thief, medical equipment, PPE, and ventilators that were on their way to other countries, other friendly countries who'd paid for them, like Canada, like France. And France has stolen equipment that was bound for Sweden. Spain has stolen equipment that was bound for Italy. Do you see? The capitalist countries are stealing each other's things, whilst the socialist country is fighting its way through the blockade to come to the aid of countries which are not socialist, and some of which, like Spain, have been irredeemably hostile to it, especially when you've got so-called socialist governments in Spain. Their hostility to Cuba and Venezuela has been worse than the hostility of the British government, for example. Dominic Raab just wrote a letter to Cuba yesterday in which he hailed the tremendous acts of solidarity. That's his words, a conservative foreign secretary. The tremendous acts of solidarity being afforded by Cuba towards Britain in solving the problem of a British cruise liner that was being turned away everywhere. Cuba accepted them, as was their duty, they said, as humans, not to leave a cruise liner full of people, some of them sick, endlessly drifting in the sea. The Cubans gave them haven, harbor. The performance of Cuba, all of my life, but especially now, is something for us to sing about. It's something for us to wave. It's a flag for us to wave. Cuba's not just the coolest place on the planet, with the best music, and for those that like that sort of thing, the best rum, the best tobacco that I don't recommend to anybody, the best ambience, but it's commitment to internationalism, the skill and enterprise, socialist enterprise of its scientists and engineers and biomedics is some kind of miracle. Cuba has rates of infant mortality lower than the United States of America. The life expectancy of a Cuban is higher than the United States of America, the richest and most powerful country in the world, which is besieging it. Just think about that. Thanks, Guy.
Fantastic. So we're getting a lot of questions in, and I just want to let people know that if you don't get a chance to ask your question, or if I don't have time to read it out tonight, we're holding another meeting. It won't be streamed on YouTube, so it'll be a private members meeting, and we'll address the rest of the questions that we can't get to tonight, and we can have a bit of a discussion about organising and working in the future. So the next question I have is from Kat. So go ahead, Kat.
Hi, hi George. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, Kat. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, what would you say to those who use socialism as justification for excluding current and former members of the British Armed Forces from the infrastructure of the left? And is it not absolutely rank hypocrisy that some Labour Party members accept sharing their party with Tony Blair, but blame working class soldiers for his wars?
Well, that's an unexpected and wonderful question, Kat. Not only do we not exclude, we have in our ranks at least 4, to my knowledge. There may be more. At least 4 former soldiers in the British Army, and 1 former soldier in the French Army. And very welcome they are too. And we are in touch with veterans groups. And I myself have done a fair bit of work for Care After Combat, which looks after ex-service people that have ended up in the prison system. We absolutely refuse to hold responsible the poor bloody infantry sent into the maw of these unjust wars, criminal imperialist wars. We reach out to that poor bloody infantry and sergeants and higher too. We say to you, you were used and abused by Tony Blair and by David Cameron and by prime ministers, no doubt, still to come. You have more in common with our worldview than you do with the rulers who send you to your death, to your injury, or to injure or kill others in the interests of monopoly capitalism. So no bar here, Kat. I don't want to be charged with incitement to disaffection, which, believe it or not, is still on the statute book. So I cannot appeal to serving members of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, but I certainly can and will appeal to former service personnel to come and join the Workers' Party.
Fantastic, thanks, George. It's yeah, it's an important message of unity that we want to bring people together to improve their lives, not blame and drive workers apart, which is what a lot of people seem intent on doing. I think Tessie had a question, so if you're ready, go ahead, Tessie. Oh, can't seem to unmute you, so I don't think you have a microphone working, but I think the question was about the role of women in the Workers' Party.
Well, we make no distinction between men and women, between black and white, sexual orientation, or any other personal identity. No distinction at all. And of course, we support absolutely the rights of all women and men. And we believe that women in capitalist society are extra exploited, even more than men are exploited. We believe that there are issues for example, in this whole transgender debate, we have been absolutely determined to defend the rights of women, actual women rather than men who have identified as women. And we'll stick to that. But we don't fixate on these issues, as the article I referred to earlier makes clear. I'll give you just one quote, I think, paraphrase from that article. If everybody broke from heteronormative behavior, if every man married a man and every woman married a woman, if all existing definitions of normality were abandoned, it wouldn't change a thing. You'd still have to go to work on Monday for the same company, on the same money, and you'd still have to produce the same amount of profit for that company. You'd still have to live within the brute, exploitative, capitalist world that exploits everyone, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their orientation. And therefore, what we say to you is genuinely, we care nothing about these personal aspects of your lives. We want to unite you on something bigger, the biggest question of all. Who rules for whom? That is the question.
Fantastic, thanks, George. And I believe the next question is from Matthew Burrows. So if you want to go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, hi. Oh, hi, George.
Hi.
Hiya. It's just a general question more than anything. Obviously, with your experience of over 40 years in Parliament, etc. How quickly do you think this party can grow if we all make an effort in terms of laying down our time? I mean, for instance, I work at the Home Office, so I get some of annual leave. Whether that would mean like booking in a hotel in somewhere where we need to campaign, like where the Conservatives game, like Wrexham, or is it sleeping on a comrade's floor? How quickly do you think we can make this thing grow?
Well, look, big parties can become small very quickly, as the French Socialist Party found out. And the PASOKification of the British Labour Party may very well now begin to accelerate. It was already savagely defeated in December of last year. Any by-elections in the Midlands and the North, the Labour Party more or less needn't turn up. It has now confirmed the very thing that broke its back in the 2019 general election. It is on course to follow the path of PASOK and the French Socialist Party. So if big parties can become small very quickly, it follows that small parties can become big very quickly. In our case, I set a target. I think I even did it on video in December at our first meeting, our foundation meeting, which was for a 1-year target of 1,000 members and a 5-year target of 5,000 members. We have broken the first year's target several times over, and it's only April. And if we keep growing at the rate that we are growing, we'll beat the 5-year target in 1 year. And that's before the witch hunts that undoubtedly are on their way in the British Labour Party begin. Of course, there's been a constant witch hunt, but you know what I mean. Jeremy Corbyn himself might even end up on the receiving end of disciplinary action. Don't rule that out. So we've got elections. They've been mercifully postponed. It's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. We'll have a candidate against Sadiq Khan for Mayor of London next May. Be sure of that. And if I can, we'll have a candidate against Street, the Remainer Mayor of the West Midlands too. We'll have local elections and we'll have by-elections. I don't mean to be brutal, but as Nye Bevan said, well, there's death, there's hope. And actuarially, there are always by-elections in a parliament. And if the right by-election comes up, then I myself will contest it on behalf of the Workers' Party, and we'll mobilize all of our forces across the country into that by-election. And so there are many events likely to unfold this very year, which could see us grow very quickly indeed. I'm looking at Fran, who seems to be on a beach with a palm tree swaying behind him and blue skies. Fran, welcome. Where are you? Or is that just a green screen?
It's a green screen. I'm not really here.
Gorgeous. Can you get me one of those?
Yeah, you can set it in the settings.
It's the closest I'm going to get to a beach.
It will do it for you if you go into the settings.
All right.
You can change it.
Okay. Thank you, Fran.
Carry on.
I've got you. Did you want to ask something?
No, not me. It's you. You've singled me out here.
Yeah, of course. I just loved your backdrop, man. Enjoy
Carry on.
yourself. Don't forget the suntan lotion.
I won't. Carry on.
Fantastic. So yeah, we've had a few questions about what we can do at the moment during the lockdown, how we can build the party and grow. So, you know, we're very new, we're very fresh. We're only going about 4 months really. So we're still having some of these growing pains and working to get everyone in touch with each other in their local areas and get them organised. So
And 4 extraordinary months too, Dan, don't forget. In that 4 months, we've had a general election and a pandemic, and our followers on Twitter have grown to more than 10,000. I don't know what our Facebook following is. Our membership is multiplying, the number of people making inquiries about membership multiplying even more. So I think it's been 4 months that's extraordinarily encouraging, I must say.
Definitely a successful start, but people are really keen to get involved and get active, and we're in the process of getting people in touch and getting people organised so that everyone can contribute and really work to build the party and build the organisation. One suggestion that we've had that people can do during the lockdown is interview people. If you can get people to do video interviews, perhaps over Skype if you're not able to go and meet them, but interview them about their working conditions, and especially in light of the coronavirus. Do they have protective equipment? You know, what are their working conditions like? And you know, we want to hear the voices of the workers of Britain and put them out there, put them front and centre, and give them the voice that they don't have at the moment. So that's one suggestion of work that people can be doing at the moment. So I believe the next question is from Sophia, if you want to chime in, Sophia.
Oh,
Whoop. Was that a
Where's
panic?
Sophia?
No. Okay, so Sophia,
Right? Yes.
Sophia had asked, are you okay to go on, Sophia? I'll just read it out.
hello. Can you hear me now?
Oh,
Yes,
there
I
we go.
can, Sophia. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much. I think I've stopped my video, but never mind. Yeah, I'm really excited to join the party today after leaving the Labour Party.
Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And really the question was, because I was considering joining a union for so long, and in the current climate and the crisis that's going on, surely unions should be, getting out there and telling people to come join us and getting active, but I'm not seeing any of that. And the worrying thing is that many workers, I'm a carer at the moment, are just being left alone. And where do we go? I mean, I've seen what's happened with the CWU and how they tried to raise the wages of the postal workers and that failed. Where do we go? Is there any good unions out there? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I joined the Transport and General Workers Union on Christmas Eve of 1973, and I remain a member of it in its successor form, Unite, until now, which makes me one of the longest serving members of that union. And they have a community section which can, if you're working in an isolated workplace or working in the gig economy, working at home and so on, you can join that. And I encourage everyone to do that. They should join the appropriate union for their workplace. And while some unions are outstanding and fighting hard for their members in this crisis, like the RMT, for example, and other unions which are militant and conscious, like the CWU, the majority of unions sit on their hands at a time like this because they sit on their hands all the time. And their main purpose is to funnel millions into the British Labour Party, it appears, and get very little back in return. So it's a condition of membership of the Workers' Party that you should be in a trade union if eligible to be so. And we encourage everyone to do that. And if they don't have a particular union to which they obviously should adhere, then I think they should join Unite. I think unions should be out there now giving away free membership. I think it would pay them in the long run. They should be organizing the unemployed now. They should be organizing those that have been furloughed. They should be going around these workplaces, recruiting. To some extent, that's now happening in the United States. I don't see much of it happening here. Unions here, ever since the 90s, really, so 30 years, have become increasingly social work agencies, travel agents, selling insurance, selling products at discount to their members and so on, and involved in the minutest, least contentious of issues. I think the unions are going to have to start thinking very much bigger than that.
Thank you, George. I think we will have to wrap this meeting up here. So there's a few questions left on the list that we couldn't get around to. So, please do join us if you're a member for the meeting tomorrow, where we'll be going over a bit more. It'll be a private meeting, and we'll be able to discuss those questions that you have and more about organisation and working in the party as well. I believe it is at the same time, 8 o'clock. We'll email out and send all the details to members. And make sure, you keep spreading the party on social media. That's, one of the easy jobs that we can all do now that we're stuck indoors, if we're not being forced to go to work in unsafe conditions. So keep spreading it and keep letting people know about the party, and we can keep growing, keep making go on to make a real difference in this country, and not like the other parties that have achieved, unfortunately, very little. So I'll hand over to George to wrap up, and yeah, hopefully see you all
Well,
soon.
I appreciate it, and I'm sorry if I contributed to us running out of time. If you have specific questions you want to put to me, please do it on Twitter, and make sure if you're a party member that your Twitter avatar somehow reflects that. I'm not saying you've got to get rid of your picture and put our wheel up there, but somehow, if you can, on your social media profile, put the Workers' Party there. It helps a lot for people to go, for example, on my timeline, which is very busy, and see so much Workers' Party members material going by. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, I hope that you'll join, comrades and friends, and I hope I don't have any friends left, by which I mean I hope you'll all be comrades by the end of this meeting. I hope you'll join us, follow us on Twitter, go to the website, ask for the details of membership, and our comrades at the centre will send it out expeditiously. Thanks very much indeed for listening, watching, and we'll talk again. Don't forget Moats on Sunday night at 7 p.m. And don't forget the old Sputnik, the old reliable, still orbiting the world, even without Gayatri for the time being. Thank you.